Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're hoping it's going to be good. I'm going to hand it over to Mark to talk a little bit about what this series is and why we're here today.
Okay, so the series is called Foil, and we're borrowing the literary term and comparing basically two works of architectures and considering them sort of characters or yeah, just things to kind of compare and contrast and kind of understand more about the discipline or just kind of general topics, whatever we're interested in design, art, culture, etc. So in the past few weeks, we've had a couple other guests, but this week we're doing a kind of quote unquote roundtable discussion comparing the house from Call Me By Your Name, hi Rennie, and the house from Parasite. And it's kind of, I mean, we've only been doing this for 4 weeks, so everything has been an experiment this far. But this format is also going to be interesting, managing 7 or what is it, nine people. So, I mean, chime in when you want. Waqas and I have questions that are going to try to lead the discussion, but yeah, you could interrupt, and really anybody that's here outside of even the invited guests can pose questions and interrupt whenever.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And today we wanted to do something a little different. The last 3 or 4 have been about kind of high architecture works that are quite well known or have been produced in an academic setting. And we wanted to kind of take it down a notch. And because we're straddling this zone where we're talking to architects, but also we're talking to a more general audience. And so we chose these 2 works from films because, you know, as you think about it, both films are in a way incomplete without those houses that kind of ground and become the settings for the action that takes place, the plot that unfurls, but also in the themes that are explored. And that's something we want to kind of get into today. And it's really interesting that when Luca Guadagnino, the director of Call Me By Your Name, saw the house, he loved it. And even though the book was based, the setting was on the Mediterranean Sea, he decided that he wanted to film it in this house. And they actually used a small percentage of the overall 17th century villa that was the site. And it was kind of fully designed and by the set designer, Violante, Visconti di Modrone. And in the case of Bong Joon-ho, the director of Parasite, a lot of people are surprised to hear that he actually had his storyboards and his scenes set out beforehand. And when production designer Ha Jun came to the project, he created these sets from scratch, and they were created for the film. Both the modernist house of the parks, as well as the semi-basement and the whole street, in fact, that was ultimately, spoiler alert, flooded in the film. So we're really excited to hear what your thoughts are. We want to briefly introduce the featured participants today, and then we'll go ahead and start asking you questions. And like Mark said, please feel free to interrupt and add your own questions in the mix. So Mark, do you want to start by introducing Andy and Rennie?
Yes, Andy. I never call him Andy, but I should call him Andy. So I don't know how far, I have like these long lists, but okay, Andrew McMillan is an architectural designer, graphic designer, and cyclist that is currently floating between New York City and Toronto amid the COVID. Well, I think he's stuck in Toronto at the moment. But Andrew got his master's in architecture from Princeton and a Bachelor of Arts with honors in architecture, design, art history, and theory criticism from the University of Toronto. Most recently, correct me if I'm wrong with any of these things, he's worked for Guy Nordenson and Associates, Workshop Inc., and has managed his own architecture and graphic design projects. And then I have some of your back stories. Formerly a bicycle messenger, co- co- co-owner and in-house designer of Send It Courier Cooperative, and also worked for Architects Incorporated, Toronto design studio and creative agency. So Andrew, say hello so everybody knows.
Hello, everyone. The intro, Mark, it was really nice.
Yes.
Very fully fleshed out.
Yes. Okay. And then Rennie Jones. Rennie could say hello.
Everyone.
Rennie is an artist and licensed architect, living in New York City, coming from Michigan. But Rennie received an MArch also from Princeton, where she was an editor on Pigeon magazine and has been published in it, I believe. She also worked most recently for Guy Nordenson and Associates, SOM, SGVA, and LTL. But you're at One Architecture, is that now, and Urbanism currently?
Correct.
And you've taught at City College, at Princeton, Fontainebleau in France, and has won a few awards. Include them. Yeah. Design Writing Prize from the Design History Society of London, Premier Prix from the Fontainebleau School of Fine Arts, and she's written pieces for Arc Daily, Architizer, Clog, and Pigeon. And
That was extensive.
Rennie yeah, it's very extensive. Are also people that I like to have conversations with in kind of daily life as well. So I'm happy to have you guys here.
Welcome. I'll introduce a couple of people as well. Nicky is a dear friend. We worked together at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill in their New York office. Nicky grew up in Shanghai and got her master's in architecture from the Yale School of Architecture. She is now the head of design and strategy at Junzi Kitchen, a fast casual Northern Chinese restaurant with several locations, including their original location in New Haven, Connecticut, and the Yale campus. They have recently been doing a lot of work on deliveries of food to New York City hospitals. So hi, Nicky.
Hi, everyone. I didn't know coffee was required. I have to prepare something.
You can pull something together really quick. Philip is a longtime friend of mine from the time we first met as interns at OMA in Rotterdam. Together, we tried to figure out how to survive in that city and also how to survive in Rem Koolhaas's office. Philip has also worked for Sana and Christian Carrots, is currently working in New York City, and he received his master's in architecture from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Hi, Philip. Momin, I have known the longest. Back in 2005, 2006, we were part of the same choir in Karachi, my hometown, though I have no idea why they put me in the choir. I'm a terrible singer. Momin's work encapsulates photography, design, theater, writing, and visual art. He studied communication design at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture and has taught extensively at the undergraduate, primary, and secondary school levels. So welcome, Momin.
Welcome.
Hey, everyone.
We're so excited to have everybody here today. And of course, there's a lot to talk about. And so we'll start with the first question, I guess, and anybody can take it. I know that some of you, including my co-conspirator here, Mark, watched these films for the first time. What was it like as architects and artists watching these films? What was the experience like for you?
I don't want to start. I mean, I can start, but I feel like
You can start.
I've heard too much. I mean, for me, it was. I mean, it's always interesting when you're watching a film, knowing you're watching it for something, right? So I don't know if I would have picked up on all the kind of like architectural implications had I not been watching it specifically for that. So I think like that was something I was aware of, and is like, frankly, I guess like kind of takes some of the joy out of watching a film when you're like kind of like taking screenshots and trying to understand what's going where. But it also, you know, makes you notice certain things, which I think we'll get into. And I have questions, but I want to hear, I don't know, I know Andrew, not to call you out, has some like kind of like political opinion reactions to at least Call Me by Your Name. That I also, question, I guess, like the kind of like, you know, age discrepancy between the two characters is something that like a lot of people have actually been responding to on a lot of people on my like Instagram story about how that's kind of a thing. So I think there's like other kind of challenging topics or controversial topics that I think were also running through my mind. No.
Andrew, did you watch these for the first time?
No, I watched them both when they came out. When they first came out. I'm sure we'll do a lot of unpacking in terms of Call Me by Your Name. It seems unavoidable, even if we're just talking about the house. But I definitely had a feeling of, let's say, intense disappointment in the kind of fantastical nature of the relationship, and also the age discrepancy is a pretty big deal. But I think the thing that troubled me the most about Call Me by Your Name was that it was a story about an impossible kind of love happening in a very sort of impossible place in this beautiful house in Lombardy, kind of like set in this unbelievably expensive landscape, something that is like very unattainable. And in watching Parasite, I had kind of the opposite feeling. That the
you were
sort
like, I could totally infiltrate a wealthy family and take over.
Yeah, that it kind of like lay bare all the kind of like social and sort of labor relations that were required to like prop up this kind of wealth. But also I found it like very heavy-handed. And I know a lot of people love this movie very much, and I like it a lot. But I did come away from it feeling like the story that it told came on a little too strong. So for me, they represent kind of like polar opposites in terms of movie. And I'm much more on the side of Parasite than on Call Me by Your Name, which I have not seen again, but did watch some snippets of to prepare for this. Mm-hmm. But yeah, maybe some other people share some opinions about it.
Yeah, I think both movies have very different positions towards wealth and what wealth means, and the architecture in the two houses reflect that. Like I watched Call Me by Your Name for the first time yesterday, and it was just, yeah, it was kind of fantastical, right? This like a beautiful Italian villa and like the perfect setting to kind of live out this romance. And it was, yeah, it was very, I don't know, I was uncomfortable with this kind of romantic vision of this very beautiful house. It's very difficult to like criticize, right? Because it just fits so perfectly into our ideal version of this like Italian villa or like Western beauty even. Yeah, it was a little bit uncomfortable, whereas Parasite is very comfortable with criticizing that kind of wealth. And like the CGI of the house, which is like, I don't know if you've seen these images of the house, like it's only like the living room that's built, or only like the kitchen that's built. The upper floors are all CGI. Like it's like kitsch modernism that's meant to be critiqued. Mm-hmm. Whereas Call Me by Your Name, the villa is totally opposite. Like it's a luxury to be celebrated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really felt the same way. Actually, I mean, first of all, when I saw the invitation, I was like overwhelmed by the nostalgia of a before time when we could still go to the movie theaters. I watched both of the movies in a very large theater on a really large screen, and I think, you know, that experience, who knows when we're gonna get that experience back. And despite of the choice or whether it's intuitive or deliberatism towards wealth, I did feel that even though the two sites were, from the point of the creators and directors and set designers, they were kind of polar opposite, because one is sort of this found site that happened to have this set of parameters that, you know, feed into the romanticism. But on the other hand, it was carefully constructed, from the city scale to the villa scale to the furniture, and I think every aspect of those deliberation framed the class difference in Parasite, which was really well done. But I do have to say, in both settings, even though one is found, the other one is constructed down to the very last detail, every character felt somewhat trapped in their own space. And don't we all feel somehow, in some way, trapped these days? Because of the confine of the premise, the story unfold, and they have to unfold towards a certain way, and there's this just buildup of urgency that cannot be done without, you know, these homes. And oftentimes it makes me think of Casa Malaparte, is this like very special home that, you know, you built for yourself and for the story, and whatever that happens, it contains within, and it's really fascinating that way.
Yeah. Rennie and Momin, any initial reactions?
Yeah, so actually I'm just, when I was researching this, which was that the Pullmans are neither stuffy nor rich people, and their home needed to convey that. Villa Albergoni is the perfectly imperfect realization of the Pullmans' Italian existence, a place that is at once grand in scale and intimate and rumpled in feel. And I have to say that when I watched the movie, you know, you look at the villa and you expect it to be more luxurious, and I was a little surprised that it was so run down. And, you know, like Karachi and the whole subcontinent is full of homes that are really grand with a lot of land, but the inhabitants no longer have money. And in the movie they mention that Mrs. Pullman inherited this property, so it made sense. Like, it didn't come across like the wealth of this didn't come across, wasn't in my face at all. In fact, I had to kind of like remind myself that it was possible to kind of like for it to kind of have this sort of really seemingly exclusive lifestyle, and yet for it to be completely everyday for many people. Whereas when you come to Parasite, like, I was really immediately struck by the class and wealth difference, that was the point of it. And I actually thought, like, maybe I'm more of a romantic, and maybe I've kind of like grown up in the 80s, and I've kind of been familiar with the sort of like age discrepancy. So none of that felt unreal to me. I think it felt very like plausible and very tenderly done. And I liked how, like, with Parasite, the house, like the architecture, whichever space you're in, the architecture demands attention. And with Call Me By Your Name, I had to sort of remind myself that I was going to be thinking about this, and kind of, you know, it just sort of like, it just felt so natural, like a comfortable sort of bed you're in, kind of like, you know, just rolling about, and you kind of like, oh wait, this is, I'm in a bed, I'm not like, you know, lying on the floor. So it was that sort of feeling for me. And disclaimer, I tried streaming Parasite 6-7 times. It would buffer, and then like the bit is it. So I've only seen half, and then I read the whole plot, and I have skipped forward, so I see everything unfold and read everything. But I haven't seen the entire second half unravel in the way that you know it to.
Spoiler alert, you might.
Yeah, I know everything.
Hidden spaces.
Yeah, I totally agree with the sense of the architecture and just being a backdrop and fading into the background in Call Me By Your Name, and it being kind of like dominant, almost to the point of like oppressive, you know, suppressive feeling in Parasite. And I think, like, disclaimer on my part, I've only watched half of Call Me By Your Name. about an hour ago because I've been avoiding it because I think Timothée Chalamet's anyway. But basically, like, yeah, in Parasite, there's all these wide angle shots where you get this kind of like rendering level view of the architecture. And in Call Me by Your Name, those zoom out so far halfway through the movie have only been of like the orchards or the sea or, you know, the landscape. So that wealth that, yeah, it's a little bit harder to pick up on that, even though I think it's a lot more apparent with the relationships between the servants and the people who are, as you said, like propping up that wealth, when those are made so explicit in Parasite. But I think what struck me initially about Parasite was that, you know, it's always funny when architects are featured in movies or architecture is featured in movies because you get this sense of what popular culture thinks architecture is. And that house is just so, I mean, I found it terrible. Like, not as a piece of art, but to live in, you know, it's just like so gloomy and expansive and empty. And there's almost like no feeling of it being lived in, which is totally opposite of Call Me by Your Name, I think. But yeah, just to the way that I think it's funny to hear that the lower, like the basement house that the family lives in the lower class street, that was also meticulously designed because it's so spatial. Like, there are all these places where, you know, the toilet being elevated and having to climb up in that little recess part and like bending over things to sit at the table, and just like the way that you can see that guy peeing outside the house because of the shift in elevation, I think was really seductive almost, even though it doesn't seem like a great space to live in. It's just so, yeah, full of movement. So my initial reactions.
Thank you for sharing. I mean, I will say that one reaction I have to these comments is when I watched Call Me by Your Name, in Parasite, there are so many moments where there's danger, there's like terror. You know, you're under the table, somebody's gonna find out, and then you're gonna go to jail or something, and you're like on the edge of your seat. On Call Me by Your Name, there were a few moments like that, but it was kind of a non-dangerous danger, right? But I was expecting that something horrible is gonna happen. Like, the parents are gonna find out, they're gonna shame them, it's gonna be a terrible situation, people are gonna cry, it's gonna be horrible, 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 because that's what we're used to seeing in, you know, LGBT related movies. But when at the end of the movie, they went for a trip together, and, you know, the Sufjan Stevens song was playing. Like, I don't know if I had tears coming down my eyes, but I was really emotional. And I was like, wow, this is so perfect. Like, this is just so perfect. And even if it's not real, like, isn't it great that art gives us the ability to imagine beyond where we are currently? So that was like one thing that I wanted to share. But we're gonna move to the next question, and please feel free to interrupt. But at this point, we're also gonna share our screen and share some screenshots from the films. So Mark, any reactions to what everybody said?
Well, yes, but I think, I mean, to keep time, we should just move on. Should I move on to one of the questions?
Yes.
Okay, so I think in both films, we see like massive breaches of boundaries, right? That boundaries are blurred between, you know, the houses the characters in the movies, and they're kind of literalized in the construction of the houses as well. So, you know, they're explicit in Parasite as the characters, the kind of like lower class family infiltrates the household staff of the other family, and Call Me by Your Name, a kind of like invited scholar, kind of, I would say, confuses the boundary between what is maybe professional and what isn't. So I'm wondering like how the houses in these two films might reflect that. and what we can, as architects, can understand from those. So like if we think of that, like you guys have already said, in the Call Me By Your Name house, itself also has kind of loose boundaries, right? Windows and doors are open, people are eating outside, the kind of village and landscape becomes an extension of the house itself. Whereas the Parasite property is like bound by a perimeter wall. Everything is kind of, it's a sort of fortress, right? So they go on like two sort of extremes of like, you know, totally open architecture and house, and kind of like very closed insular architecture and house, yet in both cases boundaries are like interpersonal boundaries are being blurred. So I'm curious like what we might think of that and how that could influence what we design, right? Because I do think they're both like kind of extreme examples on this continuum, which is maybe not linear, but more like a horseshoe or something. So they're kind of like still close together. I don't know. Is this making any sense?
I think one of my initial reactions, it's a little bit different than the way that you have picked up on it, but basically like there are these spaces in the house that are, in both cases, that are necessary for, you know, the like tension to build. Like in Call Me By Your Name, it's the fact that they share that bathroom and he has to go through the bathroom through his whatever to get out. You know, there's that like that thing that they share. And then in Parasite, that huge expansive like kitchen living room area where basically everything is happening off of that. So when he comes up from the basement to get, you know, food from the fridge, and there's the possibility of people finding out, or when they're hiding under the couches or the table in the living room and they can see the outside. Like there's kind of this central crux that makes that tension possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually felt the same way. I felt like Mark, like the way you framed the question, I actually felt the opposite. I think in both houses, the sense of hierarchy is ever present. It's just a little bit, it's presented in different light, but the hierarchy is there. You know where is outside, where is upstairs in both scenarios. And definitely, I think the threshold of conflicts and the sense of danger perhaps always exist around the shared utilities of the house, whether it's the kitchens or the bathrooms. Without those kind of nodes of what otherwise is utility, these like kind of cross paths of people's life will not happen, and that's where conflict and narrative start to unfold. I find it totally, absolutely true when designing for residential projects, and it's true in my own household as well. I think how the place of food and the place of rest, that includes the bathtub and the bathroom, like the daily rituals basically, dictates how people interact with each other, and that's totally fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess I'm interested in two things. One of them is the kind of wait, can everyone hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay. The way in which the houses are stacked. So in Call Me By Your Name, the main floor of the house is kind of like continuous with the landscape. That there's just this like one large homogeneous kind of play area that both of these individuals get to kind of discover their relationship. But the moments where their relationship is the most tense is when they're in the upstairs, which is kind of like their own private space that, like Rennie was talking about earlier, actually consists of two super private spaces that are connected by a bathroom. But that's kind of the space that their entire relationship kind of hinges on for its success, is these ultra intimate moments that happen in the upstairs. And the same thing kind of happens in Parasite now that I think about it. You have, like this very expansive main floor of this house, which includes the kitchen, like Rennie was saying, where all kinds of things happen, and there's a lot of hiding that's happening as well, but where most of the performance kind of plays out. But then there's the upstairs, where some of the like finer and more intense kind of moves that the director Bong Hoon makes, where I can't remember his name, but the kind of the boy who is orchestrating the whole plan is kind of having conversations about peaches, and we'll probably talk more about peaches, I hope, later, is having a conversation about peaches with the young girl, and how much she loves peaches, but she can't have them in the house because the maid is allergic. And that's kind of, I would say, like, the central and most critical piece of the entire plan is this discovery about the peach. Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting that that the architecture of both of these houses kind of operates in a way where, in kind of a very traditional way, where the upstairs is an extremely private space and the downstairs, or the main floor, is kind of a less private space, so there's a lot of boundary blurring. And I kind of think that as architects, maybe we should be critical of that. Like, why are we so private with our upstairs parts of our houses? Just because we sleep there? I don't know. I feel like in the COVID time, like, the whole house is kind of just privateless now. Or incredibly private, depending on your situation. But the other thing I want to talk about was the kitchen. Mark, I guess, is flipping through these scenes from the movies, and I just saw one of the Call Me By Your Name kitchen, and I actually don't remember it. But the kitchen is the most important room, I would say, in Parasite. Yeah, this scene, I don't remember this at all. And is that the maid working? Yeah, so like it's interesting that the kitchen is where the labor of both homes is actually revealed. Oh, there it is again. I don't remember this at all. But so it was interesting to me that the kitchen, which it would seem in like a Lombardi home, would be like the most popular room in the house, kind of gets so little screen time. And for me, the kitchen is kind of like the blurriest. It's both the blurriest space, but also like the most hierarchical in terms of like traditional ideas of domestic labor. And it's that kind of hierarchy that I think is most obvious in both films, but kind of erased or completely minimalized in Call Me By Your Name. And I think a lot of it has to do with like ejecting the kitchen from the architecture of the house as much as possible.
Yeah. And, there are the private spaces, but then there are the even more private spaces, right? And both houses have them. In the case of Parasite, you've got the bunker that's been designed to protect yourself in the case of an attack from North Korea. And in the case of Call Me By Your Name, there's the attic in which some of the later scenes take place involving the peach, for example, right? Or was it an apricot? We don't know. So that's really interesting that they seem to be trapped within their own house, within this kind of privilege that does exist, I think, even for Call Me By Your Name. I can talk about that a little bit more. But in order to escape that and to kind of break the rules, to kind of misuse the architecture, they have to escape to parts of the house that are not furnished like the remainder, that kind of lie outside of the system that has been established for these houses, right? For Call Me By Your Name, I think it's a lot more subtle, but you do have references, for example, to Il Duce, Mussolini, as they're going through the villages. And this idea that this is the only Jewish family who's living here like chameleons. They don't necessarily wear their Star of David on their necklace because, as his mom has told him, we are Jews of discretion. And Oliver says, okay, maybe that works for your mom. So it's interesting to see that how the houses are both places of sanctuary, but also places of entrapment. And then how are the characters trying to move beyond that through the spaces of these architectures? Anyone else on this one?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind saying something. Just if we're still talking about boundaries. I also noticed, Mark, that both movies feature people entering other people's spaces. But what's interesting to me is the assimilation. So of course we can acknowledge that there was some blurring of what was professional and what was not in Call Me by Your Name. But what I enjoyed was the way that home took whoever came, within its sort of like ambit almost, and just sort of like made them part of that space. And there was this lovely welcoming quality to it. Whereas the home in paradise is very much intended to keep some people out. And then the ones who make it through, there's a certain sort of like sense of victory in that. And I initially, when I started Call Me by Your Name, I was very aware of the views we're being given, which are through doorways and windows, and it's a very simple floor plan. So a lot of the openings align with each other. But by the end of it, I felt that what you were constantly getting was a sense of possibility, a sense of you would lose people, but you could find them, that you could kind of like look beyond this space and this person to another space, another sort of the future and a possible. And I just felt like it actually reduced boundaries. Like the house was really important, I thought, for, in a sense, saying that the boundaries we think are omnipresent are actually, they're less weighty than we might think. Even that gate where they bicycle out onto the street just seemed to always be an open sort of doorway. Yeah, and I also noticed that Parasite's open floor plan was actually at odds with what's going on between the two families and within the house itself, with the secrets it holds.
Well, I guess I wonder, like, as designers, I guess there's like some ethical questions about it, but like, is that something that we should be playing with when we're making a residence, right? Like, should we be thinking about how, a shared bathroom or a kind of crawl space or different parts of the architecture could be used, or could, I guess, like manipulate a kind of user into a certain, or like force certain interactions between whatever visitors to the house or inhabitants of the house. Like, I wonder if the architect then becomes a kind of filmmaker or screenwriter of sorts, trying to cause certain interactions or interfaces between a person in the building or two people. Like, do we think that this is okay?
Of course, like, what's funny is that this is exactly, or when I was like first studying architecture, this is exactly what stood out to me about Rem Koolhaas, right? This is exactly what he says, is that he describes his own background as like a filmmaker and as like a setting, like setting these scenes, and that to him, this is exactly what, or a big part of what architecture is, especially when he designed these like early houses. Like, he is kind of directing these moments, I don't think in ways that dissimilar from how we're talking about these movies right now. I would say yes, and I would say that's what makes architecture so like multi-layered, right? Is that it can be as simple as like sharing a bathroom, and the intimacies of sharing a bathroom are equally as valid as everything else that we do in graduate school or whatever.
Yeah, I definitely think, like, deliberate or not, every design decision has its own living and evolving consequences to people's lives. Maybe the most important thing and the first thing we need to do is to recognize that responsibility. And I spent a lot of time thinking about like this idea of, or this somewhat dated idea of shared economy, quote unquote, that now has That used to be the darlings, like Airbnb, WeWork. Now they're in billions of dollars of debts, and the economy was built on the premise and the optimism that shared space encourages and fosters, and it's good for our collective humanity. But the health crisis had changed, at least challenged that potential future. For example, like WeWork, when I remember maybe it was somewhat almost 10 years ago, introduced the idea of We Live. And that entire business model was built upon the idea of consolidating further, condensing your private space as your bedroom and perhaps a writing desk, and opening up all of the utility and amenity space, from bathrooms to showers to recreational space to, most importantly, the kitchen, to the community. It's a huge question of how we handle that same task moving forward. And I have to say, this conversation is really refreshing, because kid you now, not after like Parasite, this is perhaps the first time when people ask me about the movie without talking about the dish ramdong. But the space for food is very important. The space for the preparation, cooking, and serving and sharing the food is. I personally don't know what that future is going to be like, because however, I think somewhat the design intent is to a certain degree reactionary to a reality, and to perhaps to a certain degree the client's desires and our group behavior. I certainly feel like in restaurant design, at least, there is a reaction towards what would the future of point of purchase is going to be, what would the future kitchen and supply chain management is going to be. And a lot of it is based on our very little knowledge about a post-health crisis world. And that same reality reflected to our domestic space is kind of the opposite. All the talk now is about how can you make our home multifunctional and make it more accommodating for people to share, not only time to cook dinner, to sleep, but also as a place to educate your children half the time, because now education is moving towards a blended experience, with half the time at school, half the time at home. And how, if you have two designers at home, how would you share that space? And maybe Waqas, you can tell us a little bit about your tricks and tips on how to manage a happy household with both of you working in the same space. So yeah, definitely, I think all of those questions are on my mind these days, and the idea of designing for a shared space for everyone is forever going to be different. I think the first and foremost to recognize that is a responsibility, and whatever we bring forward, will have these tiny, or large consequences in people's lives.
So a simple question then for people in this conversation, if you had the opportunity to live in one of these two houses for a year, which one would you pick?
Or would anybody pick the Parasite house?
I would choose the basement bunker in the Parasite.
No, you wouldn't.
No.
You would need a lot of trauma recovery cake. This is also a favorite part of it.
True. Well, functionally speaking, the house, I guess, relative to what Nicky was bringing up about, how are we thinking about spaces differently during this health crisis? The villa is so seductive because your fruit is growing on your land. There's this homesteading and almost, let's say, like a circular living economy in the house itself. You know, you can go swimming on the land, you can do all that sort of thing. And in Parasite, like it's absolutely dependent on supply chain. Like nothing, you can't have anything there. Like even the manicured lawn is, you know, free of any aberrant plants. So I would gladly take that villa.
I mean, the villa takes its authority from antiquity, right? They're studying sculpture from antiquity. They are even letting their son know that it's okay to love who you love because that's how people have done that for thousands of years, you know? So, and where is the modernist house of Parasite taking its authority? I think it's taking it from a 20th century idea that the results of the Industrial Revolution can make these things available and increase the standard of living for more people. But as the movie shows, that's not necessarily true. So to me, that's a pretty condemning statement or just a revelation of modernism. And I love modernism. You know, I went through like the American architectural schools and kind of really drank the Kool-Aid of reinforced concrete and the horizontal windows and the free plan. But it's interesting to think about real life, especially as we're living it now in our domestic spaces, and what implications that has for the architecture of these houses.
Because I find that really interesting because I kind of feel like I have the opposite reaction to you for both houses. Like, I don't know if you remember Stefan from 2014.
I think so.
2013. I stayed in his Venetian palace, which is not that different which is like a nicer version of the house in Call Me by Your Name. And it just felt so burdensome. Like the weight of like the frescoes and the moldings and the open windows and the doorways and the history and whatever. Yeah, as like a Chinese American, I just felt so unwelcome. Like, yes, there was this kind of like Enlightenment feel to like this history, but at the same time, it's exactly that kind of progressive aspect of like the horizontal windows, the open floor plan, the glass, the kind of the openness of it. And yeah, even the Asianness of this like caricature of a contemporary Korean modernist house that was just so much more that I would totally choose over like living with Italian frescoes and like wearing Lacoste polos with like my shirt buttoned down, you know, like that's like part of it somehow. It's like part of the house.
Yeah. Anybody else?
And I'm a sucker for landscape, so I've got to say that the Lombardi house is definitely where I would want to end up. But I do, yeah, Philip, I feel like I echo some of your sentiments about the impossibility of this like grand villa, like the idea of taking care of this place, or you know, what if it's buggy out and all your windows are open, or if it's raining, you have to like it would take you a whole day just to close all the windows. That there's like an impossible like labor to that the house demands. And there's something about the clean, minimal modernism of this giant house or the set house in Parasite that seems like more manageable in a way. Like cleaning the windows would not be great. But I mean, if I had to be there for a year, I think I'd be a little better protected maybe from the elements.
For sure.
So yeah, it's interesting to think about it in terms of what it takes to live in a place, to live in a big house, and how much effort or labor it requires from the individual.
Or even like, I'm sure like this Nikki, I'm sure this is like totally relevant in restaurant design, where there are all these like push like references, right? Like a fancy restaurant is fancy because the material references other fancy restaurants or something like this, right? Or that we have these associations with what a fancy restaurant is. And if we see a certain kind of mirror, or if we see like certain kind of finishes, then we know, oh, the food is going to be worth this amount of money. Whereas if we see this kind of tile, we're like, oh, you know, I'm not expecting to pay $20 for lunch here. Like,
Yeah.
and it's like racial aspect of it to these two houses that are just like similar, you know, there's these like references to like, yeah.
Yeah, I don't, there's so much, I don't even know where to begin because yes, you can delineate class, wealth, and, you know, you can even dictate your price tag based on a set of finishes. But I would argue that nothing is more important with your choice of whether or not you keep your space open. I think, and again, this is hanging over my head every day. It's about the future of dining. Unfortunately, I don't know, but the less optimistic side of me tells me that the future of casual dining will never return. You know, the time when we like go restaurant and bar hopping from one place to another and just like spend $20 and have the time of your life is forever going to be gone, at least for the next 2 or 3 quarters. And, you know, in return is the ultra luxury of dining that will remain, and the rest of us will probably partake more on the food on demand economy and spend more time eating takeouts or cooking at home, because, you know, eating out at a sit-down restaurant with white linen cloth dining tables and napkins and servants around you will be doubling the price just by the very fundamentals of the metrics that we're following now, which means the opposite of what Parasite's house tells us. Like, the less open, the more private VIP dining room experiences is ultra luxurious. And I think luxury in the future, you know, for everybody, not only just for the 1%, is that if you allow your users to choose whether it's going to be a more private, more secluded, intimate experience, or whether it's going to be a much more open forum, kind of nowhere to hide openness, is all the better. Because I actually feel, you know, the open plan of Parasite is so, it kind of somehow introduces a greater sense of danger, because everywhere is meticulously kept and is everywhere is, there's no cluster, there's no clutter, and there's nowhere to hide. So I'm pretty sure everybody like remembered that moment when the two families were literally stacked on top of each other on the living room couch.
A screenshot of that, but yeah.
Yeah, and the only reason why they couldn't escape was because the whole damn place was so vast and open, and everything is within that. Exactly. So I don't think this open plan introduces, you know, a sense of democracy and or intimacy. I actually think it's the opposite. Like, you know, we try to keep open workplace plans and open dining room plans to kind of leveling the field, and everybody can like just expect to pay anywhere between $10 to $15 and have a power lunch. But I don't know whether that reality is going to be our future.
So we are approaching the hour now, and I just want to, since we have such great people here, I'm wondering if people are okay staying on another 10 to 15 minutes. So,
Yeah.
okay. We have a couple more themes to, Momin?
So quickly, do you mind if I just add something to this?
Yeah, sure.
I felt like I'd want to live in a space in which I could grow. And I feel the villa allows that. I feel it has more heart. There's that sort of like wabi-sabi feel. If you think of that Churchill quote, we shape our buildings and afterwards our buildings shape us. And if you go back to the earlier question of like boundaries and things, like just like acknowledging the way the rooms work, you constantly, there are portals, and each time there's a transition, there's a new zone, there is a new state of mind. And you're constantly sort of like delving into, I think you want to live in a space that allows you to almost delve into your subconscious a little. And I feel the villa is a space with enough possibilities for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And with the Parasite house, it's all just kind of like laid bare, and the tones are warm, there's the wood and the green and all that, but there's something a little cold about it. And you stay on the surface of yourself as well.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, I don't know, this picks up on some comment in the last few minutes, but there's a kind of interesting distinction I think that we can make about like display of wealth, right? So like the modernist architecture looks like what we might traditionally consider like high-end or wealthy kind of place, but there's a kind of like covert wealth, I think, or like nonchalance that the kind of like villa and being able to have the doors and windows open with the like really expensive frescoes is actually like more of a kind of like power move or like display of wealth when you can be so kind of like flippant or casual about it. And I think like that going into like dining experiences, I did my undergrad in Los Angeles, and you know there are, whenever I'd want to like kind of like treat myself or try to like go somewhere fancy and see somebody cool, you know you'd like do some research on TMZ to figure out like where the hot spots are. And actually like most of the kind of like celebrities or like, you know, the super wealthy aren't at the kind of like white linen tablecloth places. They're at the kind of like casual dining place that low-key cost like 3 or 4 times more, but the kind of surroundings itself are like, you know, it's like where rich people go to pretend, you know, to play like the normal folk or something like that, which I think is happening in the sort of like Call Me by Your Name thing, which is maybe what is producing this kind of like unsettling quality that Andrew, you're experiencing, is that like there is so much kind of like abundance and upkeep, and it is an impossible task, but maybe it's not a task that they're actually trying to do, right? Like because they can afford to just let the paint peel off the walls and the building deteriorate because it's not necessary to, I don't know, to preserve because it's so dispensable, the wealth. I don't know.
I also think in both movies there is a parasitical almost intrusion by another entity, which is America. You know, in Call Me by Your Name, you have not just this family who are professors in the United States, are here for their vacation, but also the student who shows up for the summer, are bringing whatever American values, whether it be saying goodbye with the word later, or in Parasite, this idea of the startup culture, which is how it seems Mr. Park kind of made his wealth, you know, new money, or the gifts or the teepee, the Indian, you know, appropriation, and how even in the midst of this torrential storm, they're confident it's not going to break because we ordered it from America, you know. So there is this hint that some of the problems that are being experienced are because some other economic / cultural influence is being experienced in this location, you know. And interestingly, both movies have some reference to that.
But in Call Me by Your Name, it's not a problem, right?
I'm sorry?
In Call Me by Your Name, it's not a problem that they're American or that he's an American student. I mean, that he's going to say.
It's not necessarily a problem. but it is an influence that comes in and creates the drama and the friction that results in the events of the film. And I would say, you know, they are bringing some baggage from the American context, you know, how the relationship happens and then dissolves ultimately has something to do with the place that they're coming from.
And that baggage might even include what we referred to at the start about the age gap discrepancy. And I thought that in Europe, the age of consent is so much lower than in the US. So those sort of ideas, that sort of the awkwardness that Armie Hammer's character brings may not even exist for a European, which would completely sort of like change the way they engaged.
So we'll ask you if you have any thoughts that you wanted to share but haven't shared yet. And then we have a lightning round of some quick questions. I don't know, Mark, how we're gonna do it. Maybe we address them to specific people. Sorry, you're muted.
You're muted, Mark.
I said, or we could do it on the count of 3 and everybody just says their answer.
Or you can put it in the chat as well.
Yeah, well, we'll try.
And put it in the chat.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so yeah, so any other final thoughts before we move into the lightning round?
I just want to say that I think my favorite thing that emerged from the conversation today is this idea about the kind of the opportunism that architecture can create, or like the possibility for architecture to create opportunism. And it's definitely not an accent that we were talking about Koolhaas earlier, because I think there's this idea of the sort of, you know, the Koolhaasing layering of plans, generating or programs, generating a kind of opportunism where new and exciting things can happen. That adjacency is what can provide, let's say, like a good new kind of domesticity. But in both houses, what we've discussed is this idea of different ideas of adjacency, or different forms of the different forms of how architecture generates opportunism. We talked about the sort of open plan, which I think for a long time, and maybe up until now, has been the idea of the ultimate opportunism generating device in architecture, that if we just stick the kitchen and living room together, that it becomes something that is more than just a kitchen or a living room, or a kitchen and a living room, that it becomes a supra room. But there's something about the adjacency of Call Me By Your Name that is like really enchanting, where there's just so much stuff, you know. It's just like a kind of cozy maximalism, where you can, it's the things in the room where we can kind of read into the sort of possibility of domestic life, or the possibility of adjacency. It's the things within the rooms themselves, the kind of a constellation of objects that curates a kind of a moment or a space or a place where things can happen, where new opportunities can emerge, such as the opportunities that emerge in their relationship. And I wonder, you know, I still don't really like the movie, but there is something to be said about a potential shift from this open plan like adjacency to a different kind of adjacency that's more about the things that we have in our lives and how they're arranged. Like maybe interior designers like really know what's going on.
Is the house a machine to live in, or does it need to be more than a machine?
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody else? All right, so with that, we are so grateful for everybody for sharing your thoughts and insights. Mark, do you have a list in front of you? Should we do one at a time?
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to start?
Okay, so it's a lightning round. So everybody unmute and answer at the same time, but also put it in the chat. And then whoever is the odd person out, we'll ask them why. If there is, or if there are different answers. Okay, so the first question, and I'll count to 3 after, so don't jump the gun. So brick or reinforced concrete? All right, 1. Brick or reinforced concrete? 1, 2, 3.
Reinforced concrete. Oh.
Brick.
Did everybody say brick? Did anybody say reinforced concrete?
Philip.
Oh. Yeah.
Okay,
I don't know.
explain yourself.
It's surprising. Why? Because reinforced concrete is the future, or is the present and the future. And I don't I am, this is very, very critical, but like, it's kind of like looking towards the past to me, or what I associate with a romanticization of like these materials is really not that different from like Make America Great Again, Keep America Great, like this kind of looking towards the past. I'm just so far into the forget that. Let's just go into the future, have spans that have never existed before in the past, like build structures that could never have existed way back when. And that's a good thing, that like history is progressing.
Yeah.
And reinforced concrete represents that to me.
Oh, I thought you were going to go through the prefab route, and like, definitely it's more economical, and like it's more cost and schedule effective to choose concrete.
Thank you for sharing that.
I mean, I just want to say, like, I think about Gramantio and Kohler, and I think about brick being the future, and I think brick can be the future, but it is like a warm traditionalism, which is dangerous. I agree.
Yeah, I see nostalgia in it too, but I don't see it as being quite so dangerous, because it has, like, just because it was used in the past doesn't mean that it is obsolete, like, this may be coming from my own preference for ceramics work, but like, we make the same stuff now that was being made in 3000 BC. Like, it looks similar, and that's kind of like, it hasn't changed that much, and it's still totally functional and beautiful. And I think the idea that concrete is the future is certainly not a foregone one. Like, it's only the future if you make it such, But the fact that there's possibilities there, like that, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think it depends on whether we're talking about material science or building technology. Brick. If we're talking about material science, there are efficient ways to recreate that craft and warmth that doesn't imply cost and doesn't imply high building budgets. So, but yeah, I see where Philip's coming from.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, lightning round. So be honest on this one. iPhone or book?
Oof.
1, 2, 3.
Oh, Jesus.
iPhone. Wait, sorry. I'm putting it in the chat. I'm not good at this.
iPhone 1000%. Anybody else? Put in the chat.
This is a hard one to answer. Wait, iPhone or book?
Yeah, you have to choose.
I don't know.
All right. Oh,
Books.
Book.
Oh.
I changed my answer to book.
You can't zoom on book.
Peer pressure.
It's real.
yeah, this is a hard one. And hopefully we don't have to choose, right? In an ideal situation.
Wait, Vikas, what was your answer?
I think it's going to have to be iPhone. Like, if I had to be stuck with one thing, it would be iPhone, because you could read a book on that, potentially.
Sure.
Can we ask really quickly, what's with the sunglasses today? Sorry, I'm just curious.
Why?
Is that a lightning round question?
Is this a reference? Is this a reference to Joy Behar on The View?
It wasn't, but it can be interpreted as such.
Okay, good, because she started wearing sunglasses about a year ago because she decided that the lights were too bright for her. She just... Okay, anyways, sorry. Should we do the next one? Okay. Swimming pool or teepee? Swimming pool or teepee? Okay, this is a reference to the film.
Oh, sure.
You got side eye, Andrew. 1, 2, 3.
Swimming pool?
Pool.
Okay, did anybody say teepee? Or I guess teepee could be tent. Like, let's make it a little
Oh, then tent.
tent. Okay. And that just because you couldn't set up a house anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, it does provide a certain kind of like nomadic mobility, which is very enchanting. Definitely, you can take your tent to a lake and then you have a pool wherever you want. But also swimming pools require a lot of work. Like, going back to our labor conversations in the film, just keeping a pool like not green and disgusting is Sisyphean. So I think tents require very little labor, so I'm into that. I like the idea of just being able to pick up and go. Very cushical.
Yes.
All right. So the next question, city or village? 1, 2, 3.
City.
Whoa.
It's a hard one.
Really fast.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Ugh.
Even now.
Even now, city.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, next.
How long are we quarantined there for?
In a video call?
It's like rest of my life for 2 months.
All right, Mark, next one.
Okay. Horizontal window or vertical window?
Hmm.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Horizontal.
Vertical.
All right.
Where is there a vertical window? In the bedroom?
I don't know what we meant by that. I think we just meant like out of ribbon window. I like normal windows rather than like large windows.
Oh yeah, there's some verticals.
Yeah, I like that.
I like the expanse a vertical window brings. To
Okay.
scale the shift from
By the
ground
way,
to sky.
vertical window is also known as Instagram and Instagram stories now.
TikTok.
Yep. All right, next question. Flat roof or pitched roof? 1, 2, 3.
Picture.
Whoa,
Yeah, pitch for sure.
fascinating.
Ooh.
Wait, Waqas, are you a flat roofer?
Yeah, I thought I was. I thought everybody here would be too.
I can tell you're a flat roofer.
I'm very shocked. I'm very, very shocked.
Where would you get an attic if you don't have a pitch roof?
How do you go on your roof and walk around?
There's just something about an interior angled ceiling that's just so nice. I gotta say. Also, coming from the Canadian context, snow.
Yeah. Although you can also, like, I grew up in a house with a pitched roof, and we used to walk around on it all the time. But it wasn't like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking like a low angle pitch.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
a suburban cheap pitch.
Yeah. One where you can still go out when you're 16 and hang out.
All right, last one. Mark.
The last one is free plan or no plan.
No.
1, 2.
What is a no plan?
I don't know what that means.
No plan? It sounds more opportunity.
No, that sounds better now.
No plan.
No plan.
I don't think we have a plan.
Melissa says just
It's
plan.
the current government's response.
Okay, yeah, I don't know if we're gonna explain that one, but that's the last of our lightning round. So yeah, I think this kind of concludes our discussion. Hopefully this was at least enjoyable and fun and not low stakes for everybody, just to kind of start a conversation that hopefully continues out into I guess virtual space for now, but hopefully the world after. Any final comments?
You should explain your hat.
Oh, I was trying to do peaches. So each week I've done a foil hat just because the title of the chats is foil. So this was supposed to be like a fruit bowl with peaches because there's the two scenes, and we never really got to it, but the peach scene, and it is a peach. They do talk about apricot at some point, but yeah, there's a peach scene in Call Me by Your Name, and then the peach scene in Parasite as well. So
Is that why you picked these two movies, because of the peaches?
no, but that was like the most. I was pretty excited when I was like, oh wait, they both have like pivotal fruit characters. That, oh look, Rennie, are you snacking? Nice.
Made me hungry with all the peach talk.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for the invite.
Weekend.
Thanks for letting us on the show.
Nice to meet you, everybody.
Same here. Take care.
See ya.
You know.